Hey YouTube, Twig here, bringing you all an update to my Supreme King Zark Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck profile for post-Age of Overlord. I would say the Age of Overlord booster set's main focus for the cover card being Odd Eyes Arcray Dragon, and all the different pendulum support we received in this booster set being for the sole focus of the purified looking support we have from the Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 series, including the light attribute Odd Eyes Arcray Dragon, which looks to be the good version of Supreme King Zark, and a bunch of other monsters as well, including a light worm dragon and also a purified version of Astrograph Sorcerer as well. So with all this new updated support, an update to the deck was definitely due, with the overall playstyle of Zark still being the main focus of the deck, but now also having our different options, including this new boss monster to summon out. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So we'll go ahead and start off with the main deck monsters, starting with some of the Supreme King Dragon monsters. We are running 3 copies of the brand new Supreme King Dragon Lightworm for its pendulum scale monster effect, pendulum scale effect. If a monsters is special summon, and you control Supreme King Zark and another pendulum monster, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card. You can make the level and attribute of either this card or one other pendulum monster you control become the same level and attribute as the other. You can use this effect of Lightworm once per turn, so it helps with either your synchro plays or your Xyz plays, because your Supreme King Dragon Lightworm is a tuner monster, so you have more options for some of your synchro plays in the deck, being able to go into cards like our Supreme King Dragon Clearwing using this new tuner monster. And if it's normal or special summon, you can add one face-up Supreme King Dragon or Supreme King Gate Pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand. Then immediately after this effect resolves, synchro or Xyz summon one Supreme King Dragon monster. If a face-up pendulum monster you control is destroyed by battle or card effect while this card's face-up in your extra deck, you can add this card to your hand. So you have recycle power, the synchro and Xyz plays that I mentioned before, using these cards also, and then being able to make good use of them with our Supreme King Dragon Darkworm, which we are also running 3 copies of, having the special summon option from the graveyard if you control no other monsters. And when it's normal or special summon, you can add one Supreme King Gate Pendulum monster from your deck to your hand as well. So sadly, you can't search Lightworm off of your Darkworm, but you have the added option to add one of our Gate cards to our hand using this card. And then also being able to make use of the actual play setup with the other monsters we run, including our Lightworm, as I said before, being a tuner monster to go for synchro plays, overlaying the 2 of them together. For Xyz plays, you name it, you have plenty of options with these cards, or even just using them for link plays to then go into some of our new extract monsters, like our Exceed the Pendulum, needing 2 or more effect monsters, including a pendulum monster. So very viable to make this card as well. For our Gate monsters, we're running the 1 copy of Supreme King Gate 0 and the 1 copy of Supreme King Gate Infinity, having both of these as search options for Darkworm, and then also being able to have recycle options to add them back to our hand with our Lightworm. They can be additional resources on the field to play into, and also set up for our pendulum scales, depending on what we may want to summon out from the extra deck as well for our monsters. And one of the other new monsters we have is Supreme King Gate Magician. I only had the 1 copy, sadly, but I am substituting it with the Chronograph Sorcerer. So if you have Chronograph Sorcerer currently in your build, you can replace them with the Supreme King Gate Magician until you get more and more copies of this card. From the pendulum scale, Supreme King Zark you control cannot be banished by your opponent's card effects, and during your main phase, you can destroy this card. If you do, place 1 Supreme King Gate Pendulum monster from your hand or deck in your pendulum zone, except for Supreme King Gate Magician. And if you have a Supreme King Gate card in your pendulum zone, except Supreme King Gate Magician, you can send 1 Pendulum Dragon, Xyz Dragon, Synchro Dragon, or Fusion Dragon from your hand or extract to the graveyard. If you do, special summon this card from your hand. And if it's special summon, you can add 1 card that mentions Supreme King Zark from your deck to your hand, except for a spellcaster monster. So you have pretty good variety of the different cards to add off of this card, including our new spell, Pendulum Evolution, which can also then help to sift out some other cards we may need in the deck as well. But a definite 3 of, since this card can just send cards from the extra deck, so you can even send cards cards like our Fusion Dragon or Starving Predapower, and also cards like Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon to the graveyard off of this card, setting up other monsters to then utilize with our Astrograph Sorcerer to then summon out our Supreme King Zark onto the field. I also run the 3 copies of Skullcrobat Joker. We are running some other Odd Eyes support and Pendulum Magicians in the deck, so more search power for these specific monsters in the form of Skullcrobat Joker, and then you can use Skullcrobat as an additional link option for our different Pendulum link monsters we run. And also these 2 copies of Harmonizing Magician, probably one of my better favorites to search off of Skullcrobat, just for the fact that when you Pendulum summon out your Harmonizing Magician, it can be used to grab some of the other Magician monsters that we are running in the deck, and then use them for the extra deck plays, or just more of a resource to get onto the field, with those monsters being the 1 copy of White Wing Magician, the 1 copy of Black Fang Magician, and the 1 copy of Purple Poison Magician. The reason I'm not running Double Iris is because I am running Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon in the deck, because this card is searchable with our new Pendulum Evolution Continuous spell, which I'll go over in just a bit. So for the Odd Eyes, I'm running the 1 copy of Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon and the 1 copy of the Astrograph Sorcerer. Astrograph Sorcerer being one of the cards needed for the special summon option to summon Zark using our other Fusion, Xyz, Synchro, and Pendulum Dragon monsters for that summon, which the other Magicians that I mentioned before also count in name as a Fusion Dragon card, Xyz Dragon card, and Synchro Dragon card, respectively, also. With the last of the Pendulum support being the 1 copy of Perform Palace Celestial Magician, another target search for Skullcrobat Joker, and also gaining additional card effects for the cards you currently control. Being able to, with Synchros, your opponent can activate monster effects. Fusions, this card can attack directly. Xyz, this card attack becomes double its original attack. And Pendulum, during the end phase, add 1 Pendulum monster from your deck to your hand. Different search options depending on the resource you have on the field with this card. And lastly, for the main deck monsters, 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. Just a hand trap spot, with the main focus being the Pendulum setup. I wanted to run a very small hand trap lineup, but still have 1 to utilize in the case if your opponent does go first against you. Moving on now to the spells, I run 2 copies of Wings of Light. I potentially will run this at a 3 of copy. If you were to do so, you can drop the copy of either the next spell down to 1, or drop 1 of the trap lineup, your choice when we get to it. Wings of Light, during the main phase, add 1 Supreme King Dragon or Supreme King Gate Pendulum monster from your deck to your hand, or if you control Supreme King Zark, you can special summon it instead. So it's a searcher. If you wanted to go for one of the particular cards, you can always search out the Dark Worm, getting your main deck search, or if you already had that set up, searching out your Light Worm to then get the add back power of this card. And then also the 2 copies of Duelist Alliance. This is the one I said you could potentially drop to a 1 of play in the deck for a 3rd copy of Wings of Light. But it searches out a Pendulum monster or Pendulum spell or trap. So you can add Odd Eyes off this card, or any of the next 2 cards that we run in the deck as well, which is the 1 copy of Pendulum Call for more search for the Magician monsters we run, and the 1 copy of Pendulum Evolution. What I love about Pendulum Call is that you can discard the Dark Worm, get your search, and then just special summon the Dark Worm back onto the field and gain that additional search as well. Pendulum Evolution, you can shuffle 1 Pendulum monster from your hand into the deck to add 1 Pendulum monster with 2500 attack and a different name from your deck to your hand. Then during your main phase, if you special summon a Pendulum monster from the face down in the extra deck this turn, you can immediately after this effect resolves, Pendulum summon a monster or monsters onto the field. Giving you that additional Pendulum summon is very vital, depending on if you use those cards for resources on the field. And then after that face down extra deck summon, special summoning a Pendulum monster face down from the extra deck. So depending on that monster, most of the time being Zark for that summon, can give you another Pendulum summon for some of the other resources you may have. But the main search obviously being able to recycle back Pendulum cards to just directly search out Astrograph Sorcerer or even our Supreme Gate Magician, make it all the better for the search. And also the 2 copies of Dragon Shrine and the 1 copy of Foolish Burial, all the more for the search and setup, since we also have the play of being able to make use of our Dark Worm in the graveyard, all the better. And then also having the added option for that summon onto the field to get more of our search and go setups for those cards. And then for the traps, I run 1 copy of Soul of the Supreme Celestial King, tributing 1 Spellcaster Pendulum monster with 2500 original attack, fusion summon 1 Supreme King's Arc from your extra deck by banishing the fusion materials mentioned on it from your hand or your deck extra deck field and face up, but negates effects unless at least one of each Pendulum, Xyz, Synchro, and Fusion are currently banished. So this gives you a Zark much more faster than some of the other cards in the deck to utilize just with our Magician monster, which can be our new monster, being the Supreme King Gate Magician, or even the Astrograph Sorcerer. The Soul of the Supreme King, paying half your life points to special summon Zark, and then giving us that resource to then summon out some of the other monsters I mentioned before, like the Predapower and the Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, if you didn't send them already, for the cost of your Magician, and the 1 Miracle of the Supreme King. If you control Zark, activating one of these effects, you can destroy Zark and special summon 1 Odd Eyes Pendulum or 1 Light Supreme King Zark from your deck or extra deck, giving you access to the new Odd Eyes Arc Cray, since it's also treated as a Supreme King Zark as a light attribute. And if you wanted to drop any of these traps, I would recommend maybe the Miracle of the Supreme King. The other two are a lot more useful for the special summon play. It's a little more specific with the Miracle of the Supreme King needing to destroy the Zark on the field to make use of it, with the last of the traps being 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence, along with Ash Blossom, just a hand trap spot in the deck for you to use. And then moving on now to the extra deck, I run 2 copies of Supreme King Zark, with this card being your main go-to boss monster in the deck. It must be fusion summoned, cannot be special summoned by other ways. If it's special summoned, destroy all cards your opponent controls. It cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects, and your opponent cannot target this card with card effects. And when this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can special summon 1 Supreme King Dragon monster from your deck or extra deck. So with this, you also have access to your new Supreme King Dragon Lightworm as one of the special summons, which in turn can give you an additional summon of your searched Darkworm as well with this play. We're also running the 1 copy of the new Odd Eyes Arc Cray Dragon, being your new Zark light attribute monster, needing the 4 dragon monsters, 1 fusion, synchro, Xyz, and pendulum. This face down card in the extra deck must first either be fusion summoned or special summoned by tributing 1 level 12 Dark Supreme King Zark. And if this card is special summoned from the extra deck, you can place 1 pendulum monster from your deck in your pendulum zone, setting up any particular ones you may need for any of your plays. Thanks to this card, if it's in the monster zone is destroyed, you can place it in your pendulum scale, giving you a scale 13 monster for the wide variety of different monsters we also run in the deck. I also run the 1 copy of Starving Venom Predapower Fusion Dragon as the send search for our go-to Supreme King Gate Magician, and also the added option to potentially summon this card off of Soul of the Supreme King, and also the 1 copy of Crystal Wing for the other synchro plays, along with Supreme King Dragon Clearwing. It can easily be summoned off a Harmonizing Magician as well for that summon. And then lastly, the 1 Ignister Prominence, the Blasting Draco Slayer, as more of a shuffle back option for some of your opponent's cards. Also, for the Xyz monsters, the 1 copy of Supreme King Dragon Dark Rebellion, and the 1 Time Star Magician as more search and another Supreme King monster to summon out. And for the Link monsters, 2 copies of Beyond the Pendulum for more of the search, the less so much the restriction that you'll get with this card, because you're definitely going to be able to summon out more resources once you make this card, because you can just use a Skullcrabat and a Darkworm special summon from the graveyard as the Link cost for it, and then just go for the Pendulum summon after adding the specifically searched card. Also, the 1 copy of the new Exceed the Pendulum, needing 2 or more effect monsters, including a Pendulum monster, so you can even use the Beyond the Pendulum, and the monster you may potentially pendulum summon out onto the field. It gains 100 attack for each pendulum monster you control. You can only use it to the following effects of Exceed the Pendulum once per turn. If it's Link Summon, you can add 1 phase up pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand, adding back what you used for the summon of this card as well. And you can special summon 1 pendulum monster from your hand or graveyard in defense with a level between the pendulum scales of the 2 cards in your pendulum zone, giving you more of a graveyard pendulum summon. So some of the other cards you send off of Dragon Shrine, you can even send your Lightworm off of it, and then just summon it back onto the field if these scales match up. With the last of the Link monsters being the 1 copy of Selene, Queen of the Master Magicians, the 1 Zephyra Metaltron, and the 1 Apollosa as a monster to go into after making use of the special summon power of any of our other monsters, and summoning this card out to be able to negate monster effects. And then as for some of the go-to plays in the deck, as I've said in previous Zark videos, if you happen to have seen those, setting up your monster combos is a big part of the deck. Whatever you can utilize for the actual summon will give you that search. So if you go for the initial Supreme King summon, you can send the monster off of your Dragon Shrine to the graveyard, sending your Dark Worm, and then having no monsters to send special summon out the Dark Worm onto the field, activating Dark Worm to then give you that initial search of your Supreme King Gate 0 to your hand. You then just need the normal summon of one other Pendulum monster. That will give you the send to the extra deck to then go for your Link to Beyond the Pendulum. And then if it's Link Summon, you can pay 1,200 life points, adding one Pendulum monster from your deck to your hand for the rest of this turn, and unless you Pendulum Summon, you cannot activate monster effects. So with this card, you can then add to your hand your Harmonizing Magician. This will then give you the additional Supreme King Gate 0, and then you just need the one additional monster, or you can have the Harmonizing Magician or one of the other monsters you searched off of your cards in your hand, because then you could also use the Beyond the Pendulum to search out the needed monster for your plays, being your Supreme King Gate Magician, because then with this card, if you have a Supreme King Gate card in your Pendulum Zone, which you will, thanks to the fact that off of Dark Worm you added Supreme King Gate 0, you will set this scale, then utilize your Supreme King Gate Magician to send a Pendulum, Xyz, or Synchro, or Fusion Dragon, so whichever one you want to send, you can send the Predapower to the graveyard, giving you that one monster off of that card, to then special summon this card from your hand. And if it's special summoned, you can then, with this card, being able to add one card that mentions Supreme King Zark from your deck to your hand. So then you can use this card in turn to add your Lightworm to your hand, since it does mention the Supreme King Zark in the Pendulum text. This will give you the sent Predapower to the graveyard, and another card to complete the Pendulum scale, giving you a 0 and an 8 on the field, to then be able to summon back the two monsters you sent to the extra deck on top of that play, giving you one more option for the summon using these two monsters as another additional resource to use with Beyond the Pendulum to then go for, let's say, Exceed the Pendulum, because then you can have your monster set up there, but also don't forget you have the additional Harmonizing Magician as a search that you could have grabbed off of the Beyond the Pendulum beforehand, or if it was the existing one in your hand, as another summon to give you one more additional resource as a summon onto the field, already having the particular monster in your graveyard needed for one of the requirements for your Supreme King Zark. So with that, that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed. Like I said, we got a lot of new support for being able to summon out our new resource, Odd Eyes, Archcray Dragon, or the light attribute Supreme King Zark into the deck, and I can't wait to play test more with some of the other monsters that we have and the new spell and traps from the Age of Overlord booster set. And as always, until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Twig out.